Hi everyone, my name is Jen Lilienstein and I am the founder of kidsmit.com, and I'm also the author of A Parent's Playbook for Learning, which is available in bookstores and online. And what we're going to be covering today is one of the biggest topics in schools and at home right now, which is the 16 Habits of Mind. And it's going to be a 16-week series that we go through and do. And the topic that we're going to be covering tonight is gathering data. And as with everything else in learning, gathering data varies by personality type. So some of the personality types are going to find that gathering data is a real strength for them. Others of them are going to find that it's a little bit more of a challenge. So we're going to be covering tonight who came up with the habits of mind, why we're using them. The second thing that we're going to be covering are the different personality types that we use on Kidsmit and that I talk about in the Parent's Playbook for Learning, which are based on Jung's cognitive processes. So we'll go into a little bit of depth there, but just kind of an overview for you. And then the third thing that we're going to be talking about are how all of the different types of learners really approach this gathering data habit of mind, the ways in which they look at them. And then the fourth thing that we're going to be talking about are different activities, techniques, strategies that you can use to really build on this particular habit of mind, whether you're talking about it in a school setting or whether you're talking about it at home. So as we go through the presentation, I was mentioning a little bit earlier, if you have any questions at all, go ahead and put them in the chat box down below. As we get toward the end, I'll go ahead and start answering some of those questions that are in that chat log. So hopefully I'll be able to cover off on all of them. We'll kind of play it by ear for this particular webinar, and I'll get a little bit better at timing as we go forward. So Art Costa and Bena Kallick are the two people who came up with the habits of mind. They introduced them in 2000, and they've been gaining momentum ever since. And part of the reason is because it really helps teachers and parents understand exactly how these habits of mind help their kids learn better and help their students learn how to learn better. It's a lot like the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People by Stephen Covey that some of you might be a little bit more familiar with. So this blows it out a little bit more, and it puts it in the context of learning. So one of the reasons that we're looking at it from a personality type perspective, and I'm sure the reason that a lot of you are on the call today, is because we've found that personality type matters when you're choosing a spouse, and it matters when you're choosing a career. It matters when you're choosing your friends. And for those of us that are parents, we have seen firsthand that different discipline strategies and different motivational strategies work for our different kids. They just have very unique spirits. And the thing is that personality type also matters within the context of learning. It matters when you're talking teacher to student. It matters when you're talking parent to student. And it really matters in group dynamics as well, whether you're talking study groups on the home front, or whether you're talking small group breakouts, or whether you're talking long-term project teams. So when we talk about how differently they like to learn, this is what I like to call the elephant in education, which is really tied back to that old blind men approaching an elephant and seeing different parts of it and saying, oh, it's like a fan, it's like a spear, it's like a rope. And all of them are right. They're just coming at that elephant from different angles, and they're starting to understand that elephant a little bit differently. And that's exactly the same thing that kids do based on their personality types and based on their context that they know. So if they've got a solid context from one direction, then they're going to approach it from that direction. So and this is really important in a classroom or at home, because when a teacher is communicating with a student, or when a parent is trying to help a little bit with homework, you need to make sure that you're coming at it from the angle that the child is approaching it from, because they don't have a firm grasp of that understanding yet, and they haven't gathered enough data yet. So they're starting from one angle. And for some of you on the call who are parents who may not be homeschoolers, wondering whether or not this is really a good webinar for you, one of the things that I like to bring up first in most of my presentations is that while a lot of us look at real estate in terms of which schools have the best API scores, which ones are in the best school districts. What they've found now in a study that was published out of North Carolina State and Brigham Young University and University of California at Irvine last October, these researchers found that parental involvement is actually a more significant factor in a child's academic performance than the qualities of the school itself. So while we're all looking at real estate and at the community and at the home itself, we should really be looking inside the home for what's happening inside the home. So one of the things that I like to talk to parents about is how we need to think of ourselves more as semi-homeschoolers and as partners and team members in our child's education with the teacher and the student. All of us need to be working together to help those kids achieve as great of academic success as we possibly can, because it's something that does need to be in both spaces, both in school and at home, in order for learning to really get maximized. These are the 8 types of learners. Some of you may be familiar with them, some of you may not. What may happen for a lot of you is you may look at these and say, well, wait, I'm familiar with myers-briggs, and there are only 3 characters here as opposed to 4. Where's my, ENFP? Well, what happens is that kids have a hero process that they've established by the time that they're in elementary school all the way through junior high. They really don't start establishing that 4th character until they start to get toward the end of junior high and into high school. So that's why at Kidsmit we focus in on these 8 types of learners, and they really parallel with the Young's cognitive processes. And these strengths that you start out with as a child are the ones that continue to be your strength and your primary strength, and something that you fall back on most often throughout your life. So, and they are, down here you see that we've got ISJ, and that's an introverted sensor, and you'll see these icons happen throughout the course of the presentation. So if you know what types of learners your kids are, go ahead and key into what these icons are, because you'll see them pop up as we go through. So we've got an introverted sensor, an introverted feeler, an extroverted feeler, an extroverted sensor, an extroverted thinker, an extroverted intuitive, an introverted intuitive, and an introverted thinker. So these are the 8 types of learners that we talk about and that I talk about in my book and that we talk about on Kidsmit. So if you ever do our profiles on Kidsmit, they are free. You will understand where these came from. So again, hero process, it's that middle character. So you're either an extrovert or introvert, and that is really where you get your energy from. Extroverts tend to get their energy from being around a lot of people. Introverts get a lot more of their energy from reflection and kind of being with their own thoughts. So it's where you gain your energy from. And then judging and perceiving is our tortoises and hares of the world. So the tortoises tend to be judgers with the slow and steady wins the race kind of mentality, and the perceivers tend to be more of the hares, where they are really energized by those deadlines. And then the middle character comes into play, and that's your hero process. Linda V. Barron's in Dynamics of Personality Type, which was a fabulous book that was written in 1999, said, and I fully agree with her, that we're born with a tendency to behave in certain ways, which influences how we adapt and grow and develop. And when we have to act in ways that are different from our natural inclinations, we're likely to pay a high energy cost. And for those of you who are familiar with the state of flow that a lot of the learning theorists have talked about, that's what happens when we behave in congruence with our personality. So we're able to learn with a lot less energy put into it when we're adhering or embracing what our natural tendencies are. Makes it a lot easier. So if you've got a struggling learner, if you can key into those personality type differentiations, it'll make it a lot easier for them. So now we're going to talk about how the 8 types of learners gather data, because that's what our topic is tonight, is that gathering data. For an extroverted sensor, they tend to gather data in a way that's really familiar to a lot of us. It's kind of the textbook way of gathering data. They like to focus on the present and what's happening right now. A lot of the questions that they tend to ask themselves are, what am I experiencing? What's changing in the data set right now? what happens when I act on the data in this way? So again, present tense. What are the details that others might miss? Again, present tense on this particular type of learner. For an introverted sensor, on the other hand, they like to focus on the past and what they experienced or understood. So whereas the extroverted sensor is really living in the moment, the introverted sensor tends to build things on top of what their previous experiences are, so what their memories say and what their recollections are. So a lot of the questions they'll ask themselves when they're gathering data are things like, what are all the variables based on what I saw, past tense? What happens when I repeat the experiment? Do I get the same result? What's different about what happened this time, and why, and what changed? Or this reminds me of X. I wonder if the same result will occur. And as you go through these learners with me, you'll start to see how everything fits together so beautifully, and we really do need all of these types of learners in order to really get a complete picture of the challenges that we're up against and really understand how we can solve them. So these are more of your traditional data gatherers. For sensors, data gathering is an absolute strength. And also from a thinker's perspective, they're gathering data. They like to focus, for the extroverted thinker, they like to focus on the present tense and organize criteria for evaluation. So while the sensor will go and key into the data aspects that they're looking at, the thinkers will go and create a framework for that data. So they can say, okay, well, this is the data that we're gathering, and this is how it lives within a larger framework. So the things that the extroverted thinker tend to think about are, how should I structure the data? What criteria should I examine? Are there subcomponents to the criteria that we should be looking at? How can we reach a solid result or conclusion most quickly? They're really interested in efficiency for an extroverted thinker. And so the extroverted thinker, much more about the structure of the data. So you can see how pairing a sensor with a thinker really does a great job when you're talking about project groups and long-term project teams or even study groups. They dovetail really nicely into both the details and the overall structure. For an introverted thinker, it's a little bit different. Instead of doing it in terms of what's happening in the present tense, they like to focus on placing that data in a universal framework. So rather than coming up with the framework themselves, they like to look at what models, what criteria, what analyses and strategies already exist, and which ones could they employ in this particular case. So the questions that they'll be asking themselves when they're gathering data are, what rules and criteria apply to this analysis? What data model should I be using? What strategies should I employ? Does this fit the model? So they'll be looking at it from that perspective. And as we move into feelers, and so from a thinking perspective, another way that you might want to take a look at it is that the thinkers tend to look at things quantitatively, whereas the feelers tend to look at things qualitatively. So different kinds of data sets resonate for both groups. From an extroverted feeler perspective, they like to focus on the immediate future and what it means. Or actually, I think I've got the extroverted intuitive thing in the bubble there. They like to focus on the present and how that impacts the people that in their surroundings. So they like to think a lot more about whose needs do I keep in mind? How can I best serve my teammates? What will make other people happy with my analysis? What type of data will be the most benefit to the audience? They really concentrate a lot more on who will things impact and how. And they really think and judge in shades of gray, which is why the Likert scale is so appealing to a feeler versus a yes and no answer for a thinker. It really is that shades of gray. So you'll see a lot more of data gathering from a Likert perspective, which is, on that scale of 1 to 10, or from, the really, really love it to the really, really hate it kinds of questions. From a data gathering standpoint for an introverted feeler, they like to evaluate the importance of criteria in a personal framework. So rather than how it is impacted in the framework of the greater whole, it's a lot more of a personal, how is this impacting my values? Does this criteria feel right to me? What values are at stake once I reach a conclusion? So a lot of times they'll look at the end first and say, you know, what am I trying to accomplish here? And how can I create the data set so that I can look at whether or not I can accomplish that goal? What data could make a positive impact or further a cause? What data is going to be more of a detriment? What data was missed that caused us to reach what they consider the wrong conclusion? They're very values-based. So if something happens that's doesn't really jive with their values, they'll often think of it as a wrong conclusion versus just a difference. And then, so they have a little bit more of a challenge from the data perspective, the feelers do, from the strict data perspective that we generally think of. The ones that have the toughest time are going to be your intuitives, and that's because they just think about things for either in the immediate future for an extroverted intuitive or in the long, for the long game for the introverted intuitives. So it's, for them, it's much easier for them to back into data sets as opposed to starting from the data. So and the other challenge that, particularly for an extroverted intuitive, they look at what are the potential implications of this data? What's the meaning behind the numbers? What if we looked at the data this way instead? Oh, we should look at this too. And what an extroverted intuitive will do is they'll try and stay in that realm of possibilities for as long as possible. And so they'll start gathering all sorts of extraneous data and start kind of jumping to, well, it could mean this, well, it could mean this, well, it could mean this, as opposed to just solely looking at the data and focusing on that data aspect at first. For an introverted intuitive, on the other hand, they like to focus on the end game and what will be. I love when things happen like I thought they would. I need work to incorporate inspiration and creativity. I don't let details or facts get in the way of solutions. I'm always searching for the meaning of things. These are things that an introverted intuitive thinks as they're gathering data. And so you can see that because they're thinking in the far future, it can be really hard for them to rein in and focus on the details. The other thing, because an introverted intuitive is a judger, they tend to jump to conclusions much faster than a lot of others do. They'll find patterns and meaning, and they won't necessarily look and spend enough time absorbing the data that they are receiving or absorbing enough of the different data pieces that they're seeing to jump to the right conclusion. So that's a real challenge for the introverted intuitive. And I'll just go ahead and remind everybody that if you have any questions along the way or if you have any comments along the way, please do use the chat box, because as we're going through this presentation, if anybody has any questions, I'll go ahead and answer them at the end. So please go ahead and use it if you have any questions. The next thing that we're going to talk about are activities and strategies to stretch and strengthen this particular habit of mind. These are things that where it's going to be a real easy thing for the sensors and the thinkers to do. It is going to be more of a challenge for your intuitives and your feelers. So whatever you can do to make that process a little bit more enjoyable is going to be a really great benefit. And one of the things that I always like to remind teachers and parents is that, being able to take from Carol Dweck's work and praise the strategy and the effort and the attitude that come along with these habits of mind is going to reinforce that this is really important. So when you've got the strengths with the sensors and the thinkers in this realm, reinforce that for those kids. Reinforce that the strategies that they're using are great for gathering data. The effort that they're putting forth is terrific. And the attitudes that they've got and the energies that they've got toward how they gather data is really important, and it's a real strength for them. So please do encourage kids in these realms. In Raising Caring and Capable Kids, Lauren Carner and Angela Hayadavian Bea Cox, I'm not exactly sure how to spell or sound out her last name, said that students need lots of experiences to construct meaning out of what they're learning. The more attuned they are to all the cues their senses take in, the richer their experiences and more accurate their observations will be. And that holds true for every single type of learner. So the activities and the strategies that you're going to find here are going to hopefully key into ideas that will help each of those types of learners. The first thing that I want to recommend for all types of learners is that you build a sensory vocabulary. You know, that robust sensory vocabulary helps us to more accurately read and classify data that we absorb both in learning and in daily life. And what I mean by a sensory vocabulary is not just it feels soft or it feels rough, but really getting into the details and, you know, kind of like the genus and the species that happen when you're classifying plants or animals, you need to be able to do that same kind of thing with verbiage so that you can accurately communicate and you can accurately classify the data that you're gathering. Because it's important not just for the data gathering phase, but also for your results phase. So being able to really key into what the smallest bite is there is critically important. Frame the questions in a way that piques interest. So for introverted sensors, what did you observe? So past tense again, what's relevant? For extroverted sensors, what are you observing? What's relevant? Because for both of the sensors, what they're going to want to do is they're going to want to really key into all of the data and all of the details, and it's going to be a whole lot harder for them to sift through what's important because they've keyed into so much different stuff. So asking that what's relevant question as a follow-up question is important. For thinkers, what will you observe? And for introverted thinkers, what will you observe? Are you missing anything? For extroverted thinkers, what are you observing? Are you missing anything? Because for thinkers, because they're looking at the larger data sets, they may be missing out on some of the details. So it's a little bit different than what you saw with the sensors in that, you know, they'll get the forest right, but they may not see all the trees, whereas the sensors will get all the trees, but they may not see the forest. So that framing is really important. For intuitives, what do you think is about to happen? So pique their interest with what comes most naturally to them, what they believe, that predictive ability. So what do you think is going to happen? And then back into the data, why do you think that that's going to happen? Because then they're going to have to say, well, it's because of X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, let's measure X, Y, and Z and see if your hypothesis is correct. Again, for extroverted intuitives, it's in the moment, so what do you think is about to happen, so that kind of what's emerging, versus your extroverted or your introverted intuitives, which is what do you think will happen, and they've got more of a long range idea about it. So what do you think is going to happen overall, not what's going to happen next, and why. So there may be a couple of layers that they're able to say, well, first this is going to happen and then this is going to happen. So what was the genesis of that, and help them back into it. It's going to be a lot harder. They think a lot more abstractly than most of the other personality types, the introverted intuitives do. So being able to back up their steps is what's going to really count for those introverted intuitives, and make sure that they're not skipping over anything that's critical. That's what's also really important for both of the intuitives, is that they'll tend to gloss over the specifics, especially if they think it's going to prove their hypothesis. So make sure that they've got all the data and all the details in there. And parents, this is really important as your kids are going through and doing, you know, science projects or doing projects at home that involve gathering data, to help them frame those questions and back into the data in whatever way comes most naturally to them. For extroverted feelers, they're, again, most interested in how it's affecting other people. So an extroverted feeler, what's happening to whom? Why? And again, for the intuitives and the feelers, the why question as a follow-up question will help them back into it. Whereas an introverted feeler, what happens, past tense, to whom, and why. How did it affect someone as opposed to how is it affecting someone for an extroverted feeler. So here are some ideas for different activities that you can do either at home or in the classroom to really help stimulate these types of ideas and these types of thoughts. One of them is, while standing in line at the grocery store or lining up for lunch, take turns describing what you see or smell or taste or hear or feel. And then one of the good questions to ask for the feelers and the thinkers in particular are the descriptions opinions or are they observations? A lot of times what you'll see happen are that the thinkers will be really great at the observation part, the straight black and white, you know, the tree is green, the grass is 1.5 inches long, whereas the feelers will key into, we think her shoes smell smelly. So it becomes more of an opinion than an observation, and both are critically important, but both have their time and their place. So being able to help your kids and your students differentiate between the two is really, it can be a fun task and it can be something that is really insightful for them. Another one is to look at 2 different items and then write descriptors on Post-it notes for each item individually, gathering as much data as possible for each individual item. And then draw a giant Venn diagram either on a whiteboard or on the sidewalk and place those Post-it notes in the appropriate spaces. It helps them to understand how that type of graphic organizer, which we use all the way through life, works if they aren't already familiar with it. And it also helps them to start segmenting data. And then as a follow-up, you limit the scope to talking about similarities and differences in one aspect only of the item, and then start removing the descriptors from each side of that analysis so that they can see how you really need to comb down and to pare down from the larger amount of data to the much more specific realm of data. Because gathering data is important in both respects. It's great to gather as much data as possible, but you need to know which data is important and which data is not in whatever you're looking at. I like to call this one the call of the wild, especially if you've got a nature smart learner or someone who's really into the naturalistic type of intelligence. Learn about the different bird calls of your area's native species. You know, it's sort of interesting on this particular front. There's a statistic that most kids know 9 different types of fast food joints, but they only know 2 of the birds in their areas. So this can be a really interesting type of exercise for them to become aware that there are so many different types of species living right in their backyard. So if you can learn about the different bird calls of your area's native species, then you go outside and see if the child can distinguish each bird's voice. And this really helps them tune their hearing from a gathering data perspective. We're going to look a lot at the senses over the course of the next few exercises and how you can really hone them. So ask questions like, does he hear more than 1 or 2? Are there some birds that seem to be more talkative in the morning versus the midday versus the evening? If you want to create a data set with that, you can get some graph paper and you can write the names of the birds down the left side, and you can put your different times of day and start calculating it and show them how they can put that data into a data set and really analyze it. And this is something that kids can do really young. I mean, it doesn't have to be something that they wait for, you know, 3rd or 4th grade for. I mean, they can start it in kindergarten and start to get an idea of how it works. You'll do a lot of the writing for them, but it will help them to develop that framework. Photographic memory, also called eidetic memory, is something that a lot of us wish we had. I certainly do. I had one friend in junior high who had a photographic memory, and you could say what was the 3rd word on page 52, and he would know it. It's something that you can help to hone in your kids. It won't necessarily mean that they will have a photographic memory, but to really be able to key into what they saw and down to the details is an important skill, and it can be a fun one too if you have your child, put it in the scope of a game. Have your kids sit in comfortable, undisturbed positions for about 30 seconds so that they can kind of focus their thoughts and their energies, and then ask them to describe pictures like what each family member wore that morning, the bedroom down to the details, a pair of scissors, the bottom of the ocean. So really get into the specifics and the details that they're seeing in their mind's eye. And the more that you do exercises like this, the more practice they'll get. And, like Judy Willis says, practice makes permanent. So it really helps them to create those neural networks. Another one is for the scent. Have a smelly stroll. Walk down a street in your town with multiple restaurants. And as you walk by each place, talk about what scents are wafting through the air. Do they smell spicy or sweet or salty or greasy? Can you tell what ingredients are being cooked? How do they blend when two restaurants are next to each other? Do those scents make you hungry, or do they make you want to walk by faster? Really helping to hone the scent sense can be really helpful in terms of gathering data as well. Taste test. This is one of my favorites to do with our kids. If you blindfold your child and then have him taste up to 5 edible items, one at a time, then ask him, how would he describe what he's tasting. Encourage him to get as detailed as possible. What does it taste like? Is it smooth like ice cream? Is it jiggly like Jell-O? Is it chewy like chicken? What does he think it is? And then try the next item. How is that item the same? How is it different? Does he know what it is, or does he not know what it is? It can be a really fun process. And then the last one is what I like to call the field trip. Take a field trip to a local fabric store and feel a wide variety of those fabrics in stock. How would your child describe what she's feeling? What fabrics would be good for different types of clothing? What other things might be made out of each fabric? How about to play outside? Which fabrics would be good to play outside? What about when it's hot or cold? What fabrics would work together and why? Really getting into that sense of touch and tactile and analyzing the different types of feeling. And each of these exercises really will help build that sensory vocabulary that we talked about. When you're talking about bird calls, what are the different types of sounds that you're hearing? Is it high-pitched? Is it does it have more of a vibrato to it? What kinds of, is it more musical? Is it just a steady one note? Are there any inflections that you're hearing? So that on the auditory front. On the feeling front, you're getting a lot into the different kinds of textures and building that vocabulary. For the scents, there's so many different kinds of ways that you can describe those scents. And then for the visualizations, so many different ways that you can describe those visualizations. And one of the things that I also like to recommend on the visual front is when you're reading books to your kids, or when you're reading books with your kids, have them identify the passages that are most vivid to them, so that way you can really analyze, well, what makes it vivid? What words are they using, or what metaphors or what analogies are making it so that you can really see what they're talking about in that particular passage, because that information will also help them analyze and gather data better. The next topic that we're going to be covering on our Habits of Mind series is going to be listening with understanding and empathy, and I'm sure that all of you know that there are going to be personality types that are good on this front as well. Sir John Powell said a good listener truly wants to know the speaker, so this is a lot of what we're going to be covering next time. I'll go ahead and take any questions that you've got. I haven't seen any come up in the chat box, but if you guys want to come in and ask any questions, go ahead, or share any activities that you use in your classrooms or at home to really encourage gathering data with your kids, so that way we can all share and learn from each other. And if I don't see anything here, this is my book. This is A Parent's Playbook for Learning. You can find it on most of the online stores now. You can also find it on kidsmit.com, which is my website. And just like we covered off on gathering data tonight, in the book we cover in we go into really great detail on how the different personality types get organized, manage time, approach new concepts, handle homework and test prep, file knowledge, what types of groups are best for them as learners, enrichment activities that they'll really thrive in, what kinds of teachers to look for in those enrichment activities, and which ones that you might want to think twice about, because it's different for everyone. So, you know, a teacher is going to really resonate for one student and might not as well for another student. Motivation strategies to use with each of the types of learners, and then handling successes and failures. I'm also available to speak at schools if anybody is interested. So whether you're talking about professional development for teachers with personality type and its respect to learning, parent education, evenings and events, book clubs, I also do virtual visits. So if anyone's interested, go ahead and email jen.lilly@kidsmet.com to find out more. Oh, and Sheila, Samar was asking, when doing the profile, were we supposed to ask the child the questions or what we think their responses would be? I typically recommend doing it with the child a lot of times, or letting the child, if they can read by themselves, letting the child do it themselves. And the reason why is because, particularly if they're a feeler, they will, and you're doing it with them, they'll want to answer in a way that they think is going to please you. And we want them to answer as honestly as humanly possible, so that way we really get a good idea of how they learn best. And one of the things that I also recommend doing, whether you're talking about taking your kids down into a computer lab or whether you're talking about doing it at home, is just keep reminding them that there are no right or wrong answers. It's okay to hate something. It's okay to love something. It's okay to not be sure about something, because really, if we're going to help them learn how to learn best and really make learning as fun and engaging and exciting and inspiring as we can, we need to know what they love and what they hate, and what they feel really comfortable with, and what they really makes them not feel as comfortable. So that's what I would recommend. So Samar, if you have a child that's old enough to answer the questions on their own and read the questions on their own, please have them do it on their own. If the child's a little bit younger and has a good attention span, go ahead and do it with them, but just keep reminding them there are no right or wrong answers, so that way you get a good estimate of what their personality type and what their multiple intelligences and learning styles really are. And Sheila, did you cover how to figure out your child's personality type beyond just gut feeling? We've got a free personality profile on Kidsmet. It's completely free for parents. It's free for teachers right now too, where you can go ahead and you can profile your whole class and understand how each of the kids in your class like to learn best. So, and we've got a few different options on how to take that personality type quiz. You can go to our Facebook page, which is, let me go over here. You can go to our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/kidsmet, and we've got a quick type quiz that's a really high-level quiz. The one that I would recommend using on your kids, because it's profiled, or it's aligned with capped personality percentages, so that we're making sure that everything's calibrated the right way, and that we've really got the best estimate of what your child is the long form one that we've got on Kidsmet. And that's the one that's all words and has the icons depending on what the age is. They'll either see smiley faces to really unhappy faces, or they'll see 2 thumbs up, thumb in the middle, thumbs down, and 2 thumbs down. So it gives them a representative Likert scale. And then for the young kids, if you want to have it taken by a young child that's a pre-reader, may not have a great attention span yet, has about 10 minutes, then we've got that. I've got a response from Samar. He's having problems getting them off to that political correct answers, plus he has trouble making one decision just because his thoughts race 100 miles a minute. I would say that maybe the best thing to do for him is to take him through the visual the visual profile first and see how well that does for you. Online also, I've got a book to look widget that you can find on our Facebook page, again, facebook.com/kidsmit, and it's also on kidsmit.com if you go to the order page, and that will go through a little bit more detail too on the different dichotomies, and so you can help to talk through him with what an extrovert is versus what an introvert is, because what he might be thinking an extrovert is different than what it really is from a personality type perspective. So those are a few different ways that you can do it. You can do it. You can do the book to look widget to check on the different dichotomies that we've got in the book. You can go to the quick type quiz that's also on facebook.com/kidsmit for a quicker estimate for him, or you can just take the visual quiz that's on Kidsmit, and that goes through having him just pick what image looks most accurate for him. So hopefully that gives you a few different options. Does that answer your question? Great. Great, great. Oh, and you know, actually, Samar, when you say his personality ended up being don't worry but happy, but he's Mr. Frustrated when he doesn't get everything right, you know, one of the things you might want to take a look at is I just did a blog post last week actually on kidsmit.com/blog, and it's on reversal theory, which I have not covered here, but I probably will after our 16 Habits of Mind, because it's something to really look at with respect to personality type. When we're under anxiety or stress, a lot of times we'll flip to the opposite type of personality. We'll go flip to what's called our inferior preference, and so all of a sudden it's what happens when you say, "Oh my gosh, what did you do? I mean, who are you, and what did you do with my child?" That's a lot of times what you see happening is they're under anxiety, they're under stress, and it's not working for them the way that comes most naturally, so they try something completely different. And, you know, a lot of us will see it happen as adults too, so hopefully that helps you. So definitely take a look at that. It's kidsmit.com/blog, and then I think it needs another slash after it, but you can link to it from kidsmit.com. Does anybody else have any questions? Well, great. Well, I think that is it for us for this time. It's been about 45 minutes, so that's a great amount of time. If you guys think of any questions and want to join us next time, please go ahead and, oh, yes, I am going to be doing this again next week, Bonnie. And yes, you can always email me at jen.lilly@kidsmit.com. Feel free. I will do my best to answer any questions you've got or point you in the right directions. And we also do a lot of different posts on facebook.com, so if you're not one of our followers already, I do recommend that you become one of our fans. We don't talk very often. We talk maybe once a day and about different topics. So we have what would you do Wednesdays. We have Testimonial Tuesdays for different ways that people are using Kidsmit to give ideas. Thought for the Day Thursdays, which is generally either a blog post or something that a learning theorist and really a subject matter expert has said about different topics in this realm. And then on Fridays we have Family Activity Fridays. So we talk a lot about different kinds of activities that you can do at home to encourage and encourage your kids and inspire your kids to be lifelong learners and not just leave learning in the classroom. So, and yes, there will be a podcast for people who can't participate at 6:30 p.m. I'm going to be uploading all of these webinars to YouTube. So while you can't ask questions, if you don't participate in the webinar, you will be able to view them on YouTube here shortly. My channel is Kidsmit Jen. And please, if you think that this was of value, please share it with your family and friends. It's really, at least from my perspective, this is one of the most critical things that we really need to look at from a teaching and learning perspective, is keying into how the different personality types learn best, so that way we can encourage kids to become lifelong learners by really keying in. And our Kidsmit ID is youtube.com/kidsmitgen. And here are the different places that you can find out more. So you can either reach us on Twitter at Kidsmit, YouTube, which is youtube.com/kidsmitgen, facebook.com/kidsmit, of course kidsmit.com, and then you are always welcome, and I encourage you to email me at jen.lilly@kidsmit.com. If there are any ideas that you have for future webinars that you'd like to see happen after this 16 Habits of Mind, let me know. If there's something that you want to see sooner, I can maybe get something in a little bit sooner as well. So if you have any ideas, any suggestions, I really want to start making this much more of a community and really start sharing with you so many of the different aspects that personality type and multiple intelligences bring to learning both at home and in the classroom. So thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. I really appreciate your time, and I know it's tough when you've got kids or when you've been working out all day to take part in these. So I appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see you again. Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you.